We're a little short on time today, folks, but that shouldn't matter much because I'm introducing a man who needs no introduction. Arthur Jackson is the president of the Humanist Community of Silicon Valley, as well as a board member of my organization, the Humanist Connection. Today, he'll be talking to us about understanding human nature, and some of these ideas are fleshed out in his book, How to Live the Good Life, A User's Guide for Modern Humans. So now I'm going to ask Arthur Jackson to come up and speak to us today. Thanks.
Hello, hello, hello. Glad that you could make it. As usual, when I stand before this group, you have the talk before you. So if you can read and don't want to listen to the words, you could actually go out and sit in the park. Or if you are interested, you could mark up things that catch your attention so you might remind them to bring them up in the question and answer period. So, as John said, the title of my talk is Human Nature, Genetic Propensities and Symbolic Language. And to me, that's the key to understanding this issue, which it's my hypothesis is not understood. So what you hear today will conflict with most of what you believe, have been taught, and think is right. So be prepared to ask me pressing questions so I can straighten you out. Why are human beings so different from every other species in spite of all we have in common, especially our shared evolutionary history? And more importantly, how will understanding human nature, which lies at the core of these differences, help us create a world where humanity can basically live in joy and camaraderie? For this essay, Exploring Human Nature, I draw literally from chapter 1 of my book, How to Live the Good Life, A User's Guide for Modern Humans, which actually is available should you be interested in getting one. It costs you $20, but there it is. From my studies, I conclude that when persons talk about human nature, they are often discussing it in a way that prevents getting to the important issues here. And I take that to be the primary reason that the discussion has not proven very useful in addressing social problems such as crime, war, exploitation, abuse, etc. We haven't even been able to resolve the issue at the core of our society's laws and social organizations, such as, are human beings innately bad or are they something else? Many of you may think that's clear, the answer to that, but if you look at what we do in society, I think you'll see it certainly isn't clear to our society. Could the foregoing be because we haven't properly defined the problem? I think so. As clarified below, I take the answer to the foregoing questions to involve humanity's wisdom potential provided by symbolic language and a useful definition of meaning of life. You'll note that there are footnotes. I'm not going into them because there isn't time, but in the question and answer that can come up. My approach puts these terms into the naturalistic realm, drawing from evolutionary psychology and using the scientific method to tie everything together. I believe that a critical change regarding human nature occurred when modern humans, and that's a technical term defined at the bottom, appeared with essentially the same level of language proficiency and cognitive capacity that we now have. Up to that time, pre-language was just one of several capabilities which included increased intelligence, bipedalism, opposable thumbs, use of tools, and social nature. From that point on, the brain was able to freely use modern language with syntax and grammar. After this transition was complete, everything else, intelligence, use of tools, became just something to be incorporated into a bigger plan. Therefore, in order to understand modern humanity, it is necessary to first understand symbolic language. And I give a resource there that I think is one of the best I'm aware of. And these enable the potential for wisdom. In other words, we did not have the potential for wisdom until we achieved symbolic language. Since this time, humanity has been moving towards the light at the end of the tunnel, where all causes are understood by everyone as natural. For example, the transition from a God that creates lightning and thunder to a natural process that does not require God's action. In other words, a transition from what we call spirit to material causal thought, and hence from superstition to science. This is the new paradigm for our species discussed here. Understanding human nature requires that we explore how the interplay between humanity's genetic propensities and symbolic language works. The species Homo sapiens sapiens, like all other species, is the result of an evolutionary history. These individuals had drives or propensities related to instincts that arose millions of years earlier in the more ancient primates. Since the evolution of modern language, the matter of human nature has become more complex. We have been in the process of creating ourselves through cultural choices that expand the focus of our propensities, such as the us-them propensity discussed later. Our more developed brains are now pushing us toward a new synthesis, a new equilibrium. Humanity's basic drives have been maintained: social disposition, hunger, sex, thirst, sleep, comfort, and the like. But each of these drives is now shaped by our social nature. However, these drives and all the other behaviors are components of the factors I'm calling propensities. Exactly what these evolving propensities are needs to be explored. First, I'll examine tribal genetic propensities, and then the outcomes that we need to achieve to produce better societies, and therefore a more satisfying life for all people. The foregoing explains the way I see humanity moving toward the goal of a society of enlightened persons who have achieved their full positive potential, who live in an enlightened community that promotes the idea, and this is key, that human beings are the source of meaning and value, where this well-being of each person is the focus for society's ultimate concern. The preceding can be achieved if each person learns how to become their own best self. My goal is to support creation of a science of religion and ethics to provide the knowledge to guide individuals toward producing enlightened communities. I believe people today can be taught to achieve levels of knowledge and wisdom that will make it possible to recognize that the light at the end of the tunnel is social stability grounded on an ethically enlightened leadership and citizenry. The history of civilization since modern humans gained the symbolic language ability, and up to this time has been prologue. Humanity has been in the process of creating itself, but only in the past several decades has it become possible to more fully understand what has been happening. In the past, humanity's self-inventing has been by happenstance rather than rational and hypothesis-based planning. But such change was always hampered by a lack of understanding of how to handle raw tribal genetic propensities which were interpreted as human nature. Only within the past 100 years have we gained enough knowledge and experience about human nature to even consider the possibility of defining goals with an empirical, testable focus. Only now do we have the possibility of developing such approaches. I view my book, How to Live the Good Life, A User's Guide for Modern Humans, as a draft blueprint for such a plan. It promotes the idea that we can utilize stresses within individuals and within societies in general, rather than punishing the messenger, that is, those such as criminals, the mentally ill, etc., to show us where social changes are necessary in order to allow all individuals to become enlightened persons living as enlightened living in enlightened communities. A science of religion and ethics could help to clarify measures to create a world in which people are enabled to achieve a rewarding life based on an enlightened view of human nature by applying science, ethics, and an attitude that includes compassion, respect, tolerance, and caring about each other's well-being. Understanding our genetic propensities. Now let us explore human nature by looking at a couple of our genetic propensities to help understand how they can be fulfilled using our wisdom potential. First, dominant subservience propensities includes alpha male, female. An important barrier to becoming an enlightened person is the remnants of the alpha male, alpha female instinct that is part of the dominant subservience propensity. Alpha males, females have a tendency to function on the moral principle, do whatever you want that you think you can get away with, and in parentheses, this provides the basis for the widespread belief that people are no damn good. In small groups, this propensity can be countered by the rules of behavior the group adopts and enforces. In humanity's proto-human stage, roving clans were almost certainly led by alpha males with the cooperation and support of alpha females within the framework of group social control. As the language ability evolved, probably guided by sexual selection on the part of the female, these individuals were able to control larger and larger groups. The larger the group, the larger the clan, the safer each member was from other groups and the uncertainties of their environment. At the same time, within these larger groups, the essential social control of alpha males, females became more difficult. A complicating factor was that alpha males, females, from the beginning were critically important, so they were highly valued, if only in terms of the survival of the group. Although such men and women may produce significant effects in their society, the ones I call Alpha A, in contrast to Alpha C, can never become an enlightened person unless they are able to regulate these drives, nor can they be counted on to help build an enlightened community. They tend toward being absorbed in their own short-term wants and needs, usually power. However, the need for power can never be satisfied, no matter how much power a person has. There is still the possibility of losing it and/or the result that realization that someone somewhere may have more. In this alpha male female, it is this alpha male female factor that led to the development of social classes, military rank, and leadership in general. As the agricultural revolution was initiated, it was laid on top of this dominance submission propensity. Prior to this evolution of the language ability, an alpha male was crowned through physical attributes, but in societies of modern humans, social classes tend to be hereditary since language makes this possible. However, this hereditary pecking order is inherently unstable in modern humans for several reasons. Most likely, physical strength and agility were important components of selection of the alpha male in proto-humans. But negotiating skills, ability to establish alliances, and talents to maintain order in the clan were equally important. The development of folk religions, with God as the true alpha male, allowed the verbally gifted a natural place from which to achieve great power, even over the warriors. These things correlate with language ability, and it's my guess that at some point, language ability became more important than other characteristics in both alpha males and alpha females. Since the alpha male got the pick of females, which included the alpha female, and she played a key role in his selection, this process would have greatly speeded up the coevolution of language and brain. When the relevant components of the modern language ability all came together, Homo sapiens sapiens moved away from communication restricted to the social realm and moved towards modern humans communicating with words, sentences, paragraphs, and speeches within the total realm of their current awareness. Handling the alpha male-female drive differently has been one component of humanity's struggle to recreate itself out of its evolutionary roots. Democratic procedures and laws were invented as tools in this effort. Ideas about the enlightened community merely express more clearly and completely how the goal would be achieved. In an enlightened community, the alpha male-female drive for power would be tempered by recognition that self-interest requires channeling this drive toward goals that are socially useful. More than that, the goal of an enlightened community would be to empower every person to take an active, constructive role in their group that is neither destructively dominant nor passively subservient. It is a basic assumption of a science of religion and ethics that dominant submission propensities, like all drives, can be channeled so that these drives do not prevent the individual from working to become an enlightened person, helping to build and maintain enlightened communities. Another propensity is us versus them. This demands serious attention. It is the one that not only supports the existence of social classes, but also gives rise to prejudice, exploitation, crime, and war. I believe this comes out of the us versus them feeling. This propensity was no doubt of survival value in the 2 to 4 million years our ancestors were evolving as hunter-gatherers. It is totally out of sync with the current world, joined together by rapid travel and instantaneous communication, not to mention A-bombs, H-bombs, germ warfare, international terrorism, and the like. Modern technology makes our multiracial, multi-ethnic, multilingual, multinational, contemporary world a source of infinite beneficial possibilities, if properly used, or a potential wasteland if our us versus them propensity is not wisely directed. New powerful images that can address these feelings at this basic level need to be developed and utilized. Us needs to be taken to include all human beings within the understanding that human beings are the ultimate reference system. Utilizing knowledge of our genetic propensities and the above ideas about tribal genetic propensities accurate? Does this approach help to clarify human nature? I see these as open questions. From my perspective, answering these questions correctly is a key requirement to move towards the light at the end of the tunnel. However, sociobiology has already said much on the bigger elements of this issue. Surely final answers will turn out to differ greatly on some. However, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that the broad outlines of the ideas presented here are correct. On the specifics, there needs to be questioning. A science of religion and ethics needs to help individuals become more aware of their self-defeating inclinations that stand in the way of achieving what is in their long-term best interests. This knowledge needs to be available so they can more effectively deal with these tendencies. Understanding that these propensities exist is not taken as justification for surrendering to them. Just the opposite. Knowing about them helps us to become aware of the danger that we will succumb to such behavior rather than doing what it takes to interrupt or redirect these propensities. Because such patterns develop naturally beginning at the start of our life, they are something we all have to learn how to deal with if we are to become enlightened persons. And we need to learn to act in new ways never widely followed in any society before. Propensities, including those discussed above, have contributed to the confusion of understanding modern humans and human nature, and thereby find a new stability to replace the hunter-gatherer patterns that are gene-driven with something that is more compatible with our symbolic language ability. Nevertheless, in spite of the frequent failures of imagination and understanding throughout the course of human history, we have been gathering experience on all the things that don't work, plus the things that produce improvements, such as democracy, liberal education, and progressive ways to run a society in general. We have been accumulating knowledge to allow us to take the steps that will lead to a breakthrough. The essence of this breakthrough is, as previously expressed, is recognizing that a new state of equilibrium in social living is our goal. In this new stasis, there needs to be congruency between the community and the individual, as there was in the previous hunter-gatherer stage. This can best be described as a creation of an enlightened community made up of enlightened persons, such that any conflict between the needs of the community and the needs of the individual can be resolved without triggering the us-them dichotomy. The challenge for a science of religion and ethics is to clarify the meaning of human nature and in the process develop enlightened communities. This is how understanding human nature shows us the way for humanity to reach the light at the end of the tunnel. And now it's your turn.
Okay, so if you have questions, go ahead and raise your hand. I'll give you a number. When you have this number, just hold it up when I come around to give the mic to the next person. I missed somebody last time because I didn't see their number. The other thing, too, is the goal for the questions is, oh, sorry, Arthur. The goal for the question section is not to reach consensus, but to raise as many ideas as possible. So what we're going to try is, you're welcome to ask lots of questions, but if you go long, I'll start to take steps towards you so that you can sort of wrap it up so that more people can ask questions. Okay, so why don't we have you go first?
Thank you. So I have too many questions to ask right now, but at least the one is that when you are talking about the science of religion and ethics, is it a metaphoric sense of science? Because the science, it has very stringent requirements regarding how to test and verify any assumptions made and any hypothesis. And the sciences that are already established, like history and social biology and such, what we know from them that the assumptions of equilibrium in the past were problematic, to say the least. And and especially they may become even more problematic in our time because of rapid change in our environment, new technologies that we cannot even predict. So how can you justify the claim that this new equilibrium, whatever it is even possible from scientific standpoint? Or you see it as an open question that for which you hope that the answer will be found? Thank you.
Well, thank you for that simple question, which I'm sure I can answer in less than 10 words. Obviously, this is a whole opening realm. In order to actually muck around in it, first and foremost, let me say, I have to define my keywords, one of which is science, another of which is religion, so that you realize what I'm talking about when I use the terms. And I'm not talking about the same thing that most other people are talking about. For example, my definition of science is the search for understanding. And this means anything you don't understand can be studied using the scientific method as it has been discovered, utilized, and practiced for 400 years, or at least a couple hundred years. Religion is recognized as an inner kind of process that all of us need, which I define as the search for meaning or finding meaning in our life. In other words, I take it that anybody who's sitting in this room has a meaning of their life, otherwise they would have jumped off the bridge before they got here. So to my mind, it's a key element which up to this point has been, I would say, almost totally ignored and not looked at in any constructive way. And I'll stop at that because there's no automatic stopping point. Do we have a 2?
Right here. Hi, Art. Well, thank you for your benevolent vision of humanity's potential.
You're very welcome.
I do have a question, though, about how we can reconcile our economic system, capitalism, with your system.
Well, if you come next Sunday to our forum, you will hear John Montgomery talk about benefit corporations, which are an alternative to most currently existing corporations, although there are many benefit corporations in the USA today. Maybe 23 states actually have the laws to allow that to happen. And a benefit corporation, a regular corporation, has legally been defined as only having one interest: how much money can you give your shareholders? Of course, that whole process came out of a misunderstanding and a lack of understanding what's the role of a government and corporations and the whole thing.
Right here in Santa Clara.
Yeah, well, that's where part of it that laid the thing, whatever. But the point of it is, these all involve a total different approach. But if it gets, see, everybody has a meaning for their life, but most of us don't know what the hell it is. So as a result, we do the best we can with our inner drives. For example, alpha males that are exploiting other people are functioning out of lack of knowledge about what their life is really about. And they're just trying to fulfill something that's in there in a very deep way. And obviously what has to be developed, and it's not going to be done overnight, is a way to help individuals see more clearly. And that was, of course, the underlying goal of this talk, to get at least some sense that there could be a different way that could actually work. Because normally when we get to this point, somebody says, oh, that's utopia, it won't work. It's been tried before, and it showed people don't do that way, and so forget it. So in other words, it won't be easy. I'm assuming it can be done, but maybe I'm just a Mary Poppins or whatever. Number 3.
Hi, Arthur. Great talk. Interesting ideas. But I have to say, I would challenge your assumption that because we're becoming smarter and better able to use language and more sophisticated as a species, that necessarily means the whole alpha, what you call alpha male, some people would more charitably call leadership qualities, and tribalism and us versus them, that you seem to be making an assumption before having any real proof of it that stuff is going to go away. I would say that the 20th century certainly shows, with people like Hitler and Stalin, and even lately with Vladimir Putin and the stuff that's going on in the world, that alpha males have just become more sophisticated. Tribalism has become, the tribes have become larger, but they're just as at each other's throats as ever. And I just don't see how do we get any evidence that it's moving towards a more egalitarian world?
Yeah. Well, of course, that's the key to the thing. What's your evidence? And of course, at this point, I don't have the evidence. My hope is that somewhere out there in the world, there are people who recognize the value of finding this evidence. And I'm not saying that there isn't a lot of evidence out there. In fact, all of my ideas came out of trying to look where people say they have answers and assess them and put them together. They don't have the merit that they would be acceptable in a peer-reviewed journal, but I think they have the value of pointing things in the right direction. And to my mind, and part of what it comes out of is looking at it from the other standpoint. Well, if this species is to survive, at least in a way that decent people would want it to survive, what would it look like? And the reality is, I say there are two kinds of alphas. Alpha A's, which I take as being abusive. They are persons, if they have power, they will do anything they feel like doing. They will ravage, rape, kill, because they have no sense of social grounding. But that social grounding comes out of a group pattern and procedure. But it's not us versus them. In other words, no person is an enemy to another in my mental system, because if they have a problem, I mean, why do people hurt other people? Because they hurt. And it's my conviction, having been around people, I see it in shaking of heads. And of course, that's the challenge. If in a group of humanists, we still think that there are some people who don't feel pain and they just hurt people whatever. But at any rate, that's my position, and you can take it for what it's worth. And if it's worth nothing, then what's the other kind of alpha? Alpha compassion. I think there are many males who truly identify with humanity, and they truly are wanting to do things that help other people. They genuinely feel that when human beings are in touch with their real inner gut, when we help somebody, we feel good. It's not, oh, now I have a debt and they're going to pay me back. It's a matter, it really felt good to help that person, to do that thing. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not going to not expect the person is going to do good to us, whether they do or not.
I want to say that I think there are things going on in the world which are improving the situation. I don't think human nature is going to change, but a system of law to put a check on the dark side of human nature is developing. And there's more democracy in the world than there has been in the past. The European Union, where the member nations are required to be democratic and comply with human rights. And there's also something called the Community of Democracies. There's about 100 nations in the system. The United States is one of the founders. The goal of the Community of Democracies is to have democracy in every nation in the world. So human rights would actually be upheld and enforced. And so that's going on. And also, one of the goals of the Community of Democracies is to create a democratic global institution. Right now we don't have one. So there are things going on. There's also something that came in 2005, the responsibility to protect is a UN norm. What that means is that when there's horrible crimes going on within a nation, the world community has a responsibility to intervene. The old norm was you don't intervene in the affairs of a sovereign state. That goes back to the Treaty of Westphalia in, I think, 1648. And that's when there's murder going on, genocide going on inside a nation, the world community is supposed to stay out of it. That's no longer the case. The world community is supposed to intervene. So we have these things going on in Syria and Ukraine and so on. So there's new principles being developed. And so things are happening. But it isn't that human nature is changing, but I think there's more people are thinking as world citizens. That the idea that we're one world is gaining ground. So there's a lot of positive things. There is evidence out there right now, but it's not being publicized. There's evidence of positive change.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I gave the impression is that nobody had ever thought of these kinds of things before. My whole idea is this is what's been happening over the last 50 to 120,000 years since modern humans evolved. The whole process has been in trying to make things better. And in other words, we do things, we see the effects, and if we're smart and thinking well, we say, oh, that didn't work. And we can point out things like that. For example, letting brutal people rule, that usually turns out not to be a very good environment to live in. So people resist that and try to figure out how can we change things. I mean, every era has times when people step out and try to move to what I'm saying is the ideal situation in which we do care about each other and we do take each other into account. And we don't just chop off somebody's head because they were bad. I mean, to my mind, Union of South Africa is such a fantastic example of somebody who had the ability to chop off a lot of people's heads, realize that's not how you solve a social problem. You've got to turn those opposed into supporters. And to my mind, that's the goal. And I see the point of defining human nature is where do we look? Do we look at, oh, somebody killed somebody else, so obviously that's part of human nature, and so we just accept that as part of human nature? Or do we recognize What is religion basically about? Religion, in its primary goal, is to help people overcome their lack of knowledge. Because remember, we're all born in ignorance, and we function most of our life out of, if not complete ignorance, so close to it that it's hard to tell the difference. So as a result, it really takes away to tap into the person's own need, because it is in the inner human nature that the answer lies. It's not imposing something on them or punishing if they don't do what we say. It's a matter of helping them find how they can really fulfill themselves and achieve what's really inside of them rather than what they've done.
My question has to do with a film. The movie, can everybody hear me, or is the sound going off and on?
I see you now, tucked away.
Okay, but is the audio okay? Can everybody hear me? Okay. This is concerning a very famous movie called MASH, that stands for Military Army Surgical Hospital, which came out during the Vietnam War, but the plot is for the Korean War. And there is a leading song in the movie whose title is "Suicide is Painless." And I suppose that it became painless to a large extent because of science. And so my question is, has the percentage of humanity that has committed suicide gone down throughout the years, or is it about the same, or has it gone up?
Well, that's a very good question. And of course, at one level, it lies at the core of my presentation. But when you start trying to dig into questions like this, you find everybody who does research has some kind of motivation behind it. And usually they have a particular point they're trying to prove. And it's clear that the whole suicide thing, it's not that suicide is not going up. In fact, probably it's going down. At least its reason should be going down. I mean, if you take one, if one is living a joyful life, even if it's not as joyful as you want, then you have a reason to live, right?
Yes.
If you live in pain and suffering, of course, if you can convince a person it's okay to live in pain and suffering, because if you pull the plug, you're going to really be in suffering, you know. And we've got a lot of things out there trying to present those kinds of ideas. And let's face it, every one of us are driven by wrong ideas, by incorrect ways of understanding things, and we can only, in my mind, get through them in an environment of acceptance where we can actually say what we believe, not what we think others think we should believe, where we can then examine our own ideas. My own position is that if a person is a strong believer in God, you do not argue with them and show them how bad the idea is. You merely give them an environment to think about what that means to them. Because let's face it, very few people have looked at what it means to say, I believe in God. And the more they look at it, the more they realize the concept is fuzzier than they realized. It has consequences they hadn't really been shown in Sunday school, the whole routine. But again, there's so much to say and so little time.
Thank you very much, Arthur.
Well, thank you, Arte.
A lot of what you're talking sort of reminds me of the basic laws of evolution, that that which succeeds is what we have today. That which fails, the bad ideas get weeded out by evolution and the good ideas continue, and that the stuff that works shapes who we are, shaped our ancestors all the way back, to the primordial ooze, where we all came from. But humans, have, as you were talking about, the development of language and the ability to network, ourselves. That we instead of being individual minds, we become groups of minds that are working together. And I sort of look at it as almost like it's software. That if you take the concept of software as any type of information technology and networking being any type of communication, that the evolution of humans, biologically really hasn't changed a whole lot. But what's really changed is the software of society, and the software is what's evolving. A lot of the problems we have today is sort of a result of how successful we are. In other words, in some ways, we have the good kinds of problems. Overpopulation, for example, is a good problem to have when compared to, if the population were dwindling because we had a predator that was very successful, or we failed to be able to reproduce. So same thing with global warming and pollution. These are problems of our success rather than problems of our failure. And of course, anytime you have success, a lot of times success creates its own problems. We have problems of society because we created societies. If we didn't have societies, we wouldn't have to worry about democracy versus communism versus other types of societies, because we have societies in the first place. And I'm almost wondering, that if it almost seems like the software is almost becoming its own life form. It's almost like a symbiotic life form that we have, that our software is the main thing that's evolving. And not our biological hardware. I was just wondering if you want to talk, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, well, obviously it does. I mean, what I'm trying to do is to create some new software that will replace the older, that will improve the life of the individual who accepts it. In other words, it's not convincing somebody, well, you must forbear because there's going to be a reward at some point. We won't tell you when, it's probably after you die. But as far as the evolutionary thing, remember, evolution and what happens is very time specific. Something that would have been fantastic at one time in a particular mutation at another time is lethal. So evolution in that dimension gets pretty tricky to look at. All we can say is we are the result of all that stuff that went before, and what comes next remains to be seen. But there are some people, maybe even in this room, that have the great fear that our species is now ready to end down the tube, and they've played out their possibilities and lost. And of course, we know there are many individuals very enthusiastically looking forward to the end of the human species, when something they favor will come into being. Of course, they won't find out about it until the species is gone, and then if they're wrong, who will say so?
Oh, hi. Okay. Well, Arthur, I'm going to say I was really surprised to hear you just say that the purpose and meaning of religion is to educate us and to remove us from ignorance. Now, there is a line from an atheist humanist that I really didn't expect to hear from Arthur. But there are those who say that the purpose of religion was really to keep down and manage a slave class from these group of perhaps alpha males or brutal people, as you say, and it was to make them feel better and to live with their losses and their less advantageous position in life. And I think that's a good description. And I think it's also a description of what you are trying to do here today in your depiction of what the religion of humanism would be. Because I can tell you there are some who do not think being an atheist and being a human being is becoming a slave to the society, to giving up themselves for the benefit of the society so you could say the species will survive. Well, we're covering a lot here. We're going from social sciences and we're going to sciences. As has been mentioned, how can we say what is science about evolutionary experiments? This is a constant problem biologists have. However, we do have examples in evolution of different ways. Now, the way that you are promulgating with your condemnation of what you say is this great evil of us against them, which just happens to be what I have personally observed as a biologist, biology is about. Biology is about competition. Biology is about power. Individuals have more or less power, and they have more or less survival. And for this, we owe the progress from a bacterium to a human being. And from this, we have the progress of some societies over other societies. All this progress is about leaving some humans behind. All this progress because someone sat on one side of a parliament and said, I'm a Democrat, and the other said, I'm a Republican, and I hate you. And I feel it, and I am angry, and I am going to fight. This is us against them. And any movement that ever got humanity to stand up for being a human brought up this kind of anger. They brought up their kind of, they're putting themselves behind it. They're feeling it through every bone of their body, and they're doing something about it. It isn't just brutal dictators which we have had to put down. It is about being a human being. What is the alternative to being nice and smooth and having no us against them? Well, to take the science of evolution, look at the example of the social insects. You would have us be a beehive. You would have us gleefully going about so-called cooperating when we're not individuals at all. We're just units of the real organism, which is this society. This is where this leads. Oh, I know it hurts to be us against them, Arthur. But that's not the real problem. And it is not the answer. And it's not what you should be preaching to what you think is another group of slaves for a religion, that you would have go join the ones that think God is going to reach in and help them. This is not progress, Arthur. I'm surprised. It is not. Okay.
Can I answer that? You want to answer that?
No, give Bill a chance. What the heck?
There was a Solvay conference in Europe. The scientists may have propensities, but they get along and they don't have this competition. This competition occurs in people like you mentioned, people who've been injured, people who have false beliefs like Hitler and Stalin. You actually get more done with cooperation. I've noticed this in my life. It's hard to sometimes get over feeling the other guy is not playing fair, but if you do, you will get more done. Okay, now, there's a thing that bothers me. In all groups, except maybe this group,
use the mic.
Whenever someone says or describes how they got away with something to their advantage and took advantage of some other people, the audience chuckles gleefully, like they think, oh, gee, I wished I could have done that. That's a problem. Now, I do agree with Robert that people need challenges, but they don't need to do it to try and do somebody else in. We all kind of think, well, I better not say that, but there's the idea of heaven. The one that I hear about aggravates me, just sitting there singing Hosanna forever, but getting along has a lot of appeal. Now, it's my opinion, and hard to convince people, that the reason we have these propensities is we came out of an area, what's the word, the classical jungle, where you can get away with anything because nobody can see what you're doing behind a tree. Now we have cameras, we have microphones, we got NSA. They could watch everything, and the only problem is they don't let us watch them as long as we have the Soviet Union. So the solution eventually is to vote in no more privacy. It's possible to completely eliminate privacy with modern electronics. Otherwise, we're going to have propensities. Thank you.
It's been long past time, Bill. The microwave? The microwave? Were you going to help? Oh, they gave up on you. Okay. Okay, let me respond a little bit to the charges that have been made. First, obviously, all that totally misses what I actually was talking about, and it doesn't. I hope we're not conducting an argument in which one of us wins and one of us loses, because to my mind, discussions are about everybody wins. And I hope that somewhere as you lay awake, sleep at night, no, whatever that meant, that maybe you'll chew on some of that stuff and realize there was some thinking in there that could be looked at a different way. But I'm surprised you're the only one who raised the issue about seeing religion as a positive thing, because over my years of dealing with atheists, humanists, agnostics, freethinkers, I find a universal agreement that religion is a very bad thing and we need to get rid of it, because these people have not tried to find out, well, what is religion about? Why is there religion in every social group that exists now or has ever existed? I say that's something to think about. And I think what it's really about is when we mischaracterize what somebody else says, we then move the discussion into a non-productive realm. And I choose to keep raising this issue in the hope that eventually it will be recognized to be more a different issue than it's normally discussed as being.
Okay, I just want to say, given some things going on in the kitchen and some things happening with the oven, we have 10 more minutes. So we'll close at about 11:20 or 12:25. Two more things. There's feedback forms on every table. If you're, I only put a few on each table, but there's more here. Write down anything you want. You don't have to fill in every blank. Just if something hits you and you'd like to offer that, please do so. And don't forget, we have the speaker table in the middle. So when we end the Q&A here, if you have more questions, get your lunch and sit at the table.
Hi, Arthur. I'm one of these folks that listened to your conversations for many years now. I must admit, you've moved me. For example, I think I had some other things to say, but I am really coming to the conclusion that religion does attempt to do what you say. It's just done it rather poorly. So we can discuss that. Very poorly, in fact. But I was going to make a couple comments because people are making comments. One of them is someone said there's no laboratory for these social experiments. But if you look at the cultures in which there's no war inside the culture, and they're advancing, like Denmark, Sweden, Finland, in some ways I think Latvia, I'm trying to think of some other country, Iceland. You know, we can say there are some laboratories in which this kind of thing is going on and might point in the right direction. That's just my comment. I'd like you to comment on that. And then, of course, I had the other one, since we're talking about movies. Many years ago, there was a movie called The 10th Victim. How many people remember The 10th Victim? It was an interesting movie in which all the alpha males and females were allowed to go kill each other, and they had listings of them. And this was a society in which, no one bothered them. They just went and killed it. But if they killed anybody else, they'd get killed. They wouldn't be killed by the society. Anyway, it was a solution. I'm not sure an ideal one.
Yeah. Yeah, good point, because obviously experiments are being done even in Palo Alto as we sit here, and we're learning by those. And that to mine, gathering the evidence is the whole point. And I say it all comes back to what is your evidence. I've tried to amass a whole volume 2 of my I'll call it evidence, not that it was done in a scientific fashion, but these are things that were going on. And one of those, which hadn't come up for a while, so I'll bring it up again, is research that James Prescott got into about looking at tribal groups, those that are peaceful and those that are warlike, and trying to assess, are there any differences there? Is it just a random thing? Some groups are peaceful, some are warlike. What he got to, which happened to validate what he was trying to look for, strangely enough, was that those groups that nurtured their children, that touched them, cuddled them, fondled them, that paid attention to them, tended to be the peaceful groups. Those groups that were, do what I say now, beat the hell out of you if you do that again, those groups were the warlike ones. And as I tried, and this was in the 60s that this was all being shared, was if we look into the United States of America, in my analysis, we see more of the punishment, do as I say, you're wrong, and I know what's right, than we do of the nurturing, fondling, cuddling. Although I do think in recent years there has been some effort. Breastfeeding, to my mind, is a primary example of a woman and a child bonding in a loving, connecting way, and of course all the things around that.
I want to say, with regard, there's this dark side of human nature, and we see it in the world today. In fact, we see these people who are kidnapping children and putting them into slavery. That's the dark side of human nature. But there's another side of human nature that wants to control the dark side. And in fact, it's part of human nature to be outraged at these crimes and the desire to protect the children. So we have now, there's a global outrage against what's going on. That's the good side of human nature, the outrage against the dark side. And it's all over the world, bipartisan support in Congress. Let's go after these people who've kidnapped the children, protect the children, as you say, nurture the children. That's part of human nature, with the good side of it. And also, and the idea that these people who've committed the crimes should be arrested and punished, in an international criminal court. So the idea is, yes, there's a dark side of human nature, but it's also human nature to try to curb, to control the dark side.
But our human nature can be controlled by our beliefs. In those groups where there's a strong supportive structure, if the belief is to support each other rather than kill each other, it's more likely to work in a satisfactory way.
This question I have is actually on evolution. And as I understand it, there are two branches, you might say, of Christianity. Those that say that evolution is totally wrong, it's just a wishful thinking. And then there's the other ones that call creationist, evolutionary creationism. Okay, now my question is, what do you suggest one tell the people that believe there's absolutely no evolution, that's wrong, and also the other ones, and perhaps if we could tell them that God is also evolving. So my question is, what would you tell, I'm just using Christians as an example, there's all sorts of religions that probably believe or not believe in evolution, but what would you recommend that we tell them?
Well, let me answer your question in a roundabout way, as usual. We have a person who's recently joined the Humanist Community, whose name is Alan Jeskins, who wrote a book, Reason's Fifth Dawning. And the thesis of his book is, if you really put the evidence together in a way that's obvious and supportable, And then you take any group of believers and put them into connection with this evidence. His thesis is those persons will go into a very uncomfortable state as they realize all the baloney they've been taught is in fact baloney, and that formed the foundation of their thinking and who they were and whatever. Probably he presents the thing a little more favorably than might actually happen, but to my mind, what is education about? And why are there so many people who don't want their kids educated, except in their dogma? I think the answer is obvious. If people learn how the world really is, and I'm sure this happened to many of you, you were raised in a family that had certain positions and ideas and thoughts. You started reading things and looking at things, and all of a sudden you no longer could accept those ideas. And if you were like me, you were the only one you were aware of who didn't go along with the storyline, and that was a very uncomfortable thing. We are social animals. We want to be around people who agree with us. And when we're around people who don't agree with us, and we feel we have to be silent because we're kids, how could we know? It's an uncomfortable time. Are we ready?
Hey, yeah, what's our time thing? All right, two quick things. First of all, I think it's important to clear up a little misunderstanding. A pretty small vocal minority of Christians don't believe in evolution. Most Christians do not believe in creationism and do not think evolution is not true. In fact, the Catholic Church has even stated several decades ago that evolution is a fact. Anyway, I just wanted to clear that up because I think we sometimes create straw men when we talk about the other. My other question to you is, for science to work, it needs to be falsifiable. I know you've been hit on this a little bit today, but I'm going to hit you one more time. What would it take to falsify your hypothesis that human nature, that evolved genetic human nature is up to the task of creating a fully egalitarian society? What evidence would make you believe it's just not going to happen with this species at this time?
Well, when I would see the processes carried out and see that it just didn't work. And of course, since we don't have the resources and energy to actually do this in a duplicable, acceptable way, we just keep taking elements that support our position and say, well, obviously that's the way it is. But all I will say, I went into this whole thing looking for the answers. It took me up until yesterday to find them and to say, okay, now I have it. The point of it is, if you read everything that people talk on this, including the ones who are opposed to your position, which you have to do. I mean, anybody who only reads those who agree with them is obviously on pretty shaky ground. So I would only say my positions came out of that kind of effort to find the answer, not just something that I thought was an answer and all my stuff supported it because that's the only thing I looked at. So that doesn't answer your question, but it's as close as I can get off the top of my head on the spur of the moment. And now,
Okay, lunch is ready. Don't forget the feedback forms. Leave them on the table if you like, or leave them in the basket. And let's thank Arthur for the presentation.